I'm Dorothy Shaw. I'm 34 years old. I'm an environmental engineer, and I live in Omaha. That night, during what should have been a normal Sunday dinner at my parents' house, everything fell apart. My parents, my brother, and his wife sat around the table. The roast sat untouched. When my father leaned forward, his voice was cold. "You can take the guest room or move out." His eyes locked on me. My brother jumped in immediately, his tone dripping with glee. "Better if you're gone by tomorrow." The fork slipped from my hand, clattering against the plate. I had been covering most of this household's expenses, electric bills, repairs, even the brand-new fridge. Yet now I was being treated as disposable. My brother's wife smirked, her eyes gleaming like she had just won a prize. I tried to argue, my voice trembling, listing every dollar I had poured into this house. But my father simply waved me off. "It's decided." My mother stayed silent, staring down at her plate, avoiding my eyes. Rage flared in my chest. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and said, "Fine, I'm gone." That same night, I packed everything that was mine, my TV, the couch, even the coffee maker, and walked away from the place I had once called home. A week later, my phone buzzed. It was my mother calling, her voice strained. When I picked up, I heard my brother screaming frantically in the background, his words cracking with panic. "She's lying. Mom, tell me she's lying." The chaos spilled through the receiver just as I had begun piecing my life back together. And what happened next would turn their world completely upside down. Before we dive deeper into my story, tell me what time is it where you're watching this, and which city are you in? I'd love to know just how far my story has traveled and who it has reached. Years ago, I moved back into my parents' house in Omaha to help keep things together. After my grandmother passed, the bills piled up: mortgage, utilities, even the leaky roof Dad kept ignoring. I'm an environmental engineer, and I took it upon myself to cover most of those costs. My paycheck went to new windows, a water heater, and keeping the lights on. I worked 60 hours a week, running from site inspections to late-night reports. But it never felt like enough. Dad would nod when I handed him receipts, but his focus was always elsewhere, on my brother, Justin. Justin had a knack for failing upward. He'd burned through one business idea after another: food trucks, crypto apps, even some sketchy online store that folded in months. Each time he'd come back to Dad with a new pitch, and Dad would eat it up, praising his vision. Meanwhile, my contributions were barely acknowledged. Once I overheard Mom whisper to Dad, "She's just here to help George. Justin's the one with big dreams." It stung, like I was some tenant paying rent instead of their daughter keeping the house afloat. Then Justin met his wife. He brought her to dinner one night, all smiles, introducing her as a real estate agent with a flashy smile and sharper heels. Dad and Mom couldn't stop gushing about her, how polished she was, how she had her act together. I watched her pull up in a sleek black SUV, wearing a watch that screamed money. It didn't add up. Real estate in Omaha wasn't that lucrative, not for someone her age, barely 30. She'd laugh too loud at Dad's jokes, tossing her hair while Justin beamed like he'd hit the jackpot. I tried asking her about her work, clients, properties, the usual, but she deflected, changing the subject to some vague deal she was closing. I started noticing other things. She'd drop by with shopping bags from stores I couldn't afford, even working overtime. Once she showed off a new phone, claiming it was a business expense. Justin didn't question it. He just bragged about her hustle. Dad would clap him on the back, saying, "You picked a good one." I'd bite my tongue, but the math wasn't matting. My salary was stretched thin covering the house, yet she was flaunting cash like it grew on trees. I mentioned it to Mom once, asking if anyone else thought her lifestyle was off. Mom just shrugged, saying, "She's successful, Dorothy. Don't be so skeptical." It wasn't just the money. She had this way of steering conversations like she was always selling something. She'd talk about flipping houses, dropping terms like equity and leverage that made Dad's eyes light up. Justin hung on her every word, nodding like a puppy. I tried to chime in, pointing out how I just paid off the property taxes, but Dad would cut me off, saying, "Let's hear about her next project." It was like I was invisible unless a bill was due. Once I caught her glancing at me during dinner, a smirk flickering across her face like she knew she had them wrapped around her finger. The worst part was how they treated me outside those moments. Justin would borrow my car without asking, claiming he needed it for business meetings. Dad would tell me to pitch in more around the house, even though I was already covering most of it. Mom stayed quiet, busying herself with dishes or her knitting, avoiding my eyes. I started keeping a mental tally of every dollar I spent on that house, hundreds of thousands over the years. I wasn't just helping, I was carrying them. But to them, I was the backup plan, the one who'd always be there, while Justin and his wife were the stars of the show. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling in my childhood bedroom, wondering why my efforts didn't matter. I'd think about the projects I had turned down to stay close, the weekends I spent fixing pipes instead of living my life. Something about her glossy confidence, her too perfect answers, kept nagging at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was playing a bigger game, one that might cost us more than just my place at the table. That Sunday evening, I walked into the dining room, expecting a quiet meal. The table was set with Mom's old china, the smell of pot roast lingering in the air. I slid into my usual chair, forcing a smile as Dad carved the meat. Mom fussed with the napkins, her hands nervous. Then the front door slammed open. Justin burst in, dragging 2 suitcases, his wife trailing behind with a designer tote slung over her shoulder. "We're moving in," Justin announced, dropping the bags with a thud. His wife flashed a tight smile, her heels clicking on the hardwood as she stood beside him. My stomach twisted. This wasn't a visit. Dad didn't even blink. "Dorothy," he said, not looking up from his plate. "You can take the guest room or move out." His voice was flat, like he was reading a script. I stared at him, my fork frozen midair. "What?" I managed, my throat tight. Justin smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Come on, Dorothy. You don't need all that space. We're starting fresh here." His wife nodded, her eyes scanning the room like she was already redecorating. I felt the heat rising in my chest, years of resentment bubbling up. "Hold on," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I've been paying for this house, electricity, repairs, the mortgage. I bought the fridge, the water heater, even the paint on these walls. And now you want me to sleep on a fold-out couch?" I turned to Dad, expecting some acknowledgement, but he just sighed. "It's time for you to step back," he said. "Justin and his wife need the room more. They've got plans." Plans! I wanted to scream. Justin's plans never lasted longer than a season, and I was the one keeping this family afloat. Justin leaned forward, his grin widening. "You're not exactly essential here, Dorothy," he said, his tone mocking. "You're just here." His wife stifled a laugh, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. I clenched my fists under the table, my nails digging into my palms. "Not essential?" I shot back. "I've paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep this roof over your heads. I've missed promotions to stay here, worked weekends to fix leaks. What have you done, Justin?" My voice cracked, but I didn't care. I was done being invisible. Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses rattle. "Enough," he barked. "This isn't about you. They're family, and they're staying. End of discussion." Mom looked down, twisting her napkin, saying nothing. I stared at her, waiting for a word, a glance, anything. But she just sat there, silent as always. My brother's wife leaned against Justin, whispering something that made him chuckle. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. I pushed my chair back, the screech echoing in the silence. "I'm not doing this," I said, standing up. "If I'm not wanted, I'm gone." I stormed upstairs, my heart pounding. I grabbed a duffel bag and started packing, clothes, laptop, a few books. Then I went to the living room and unplugged the flat-screen TV I'd bought last year. I dragged the sofa cushions I'd paid for to the front door. Justin followed, laughing. "You're taking the couch?" "Really?" he said. I ignored him, hauling my things to the car. Dad stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You're making a scene," he said. I didn't answer. I loaded the last box, slammed the trunk, and drove off, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror. I wasn't just leaving a room. I was done carrying them all. A few days later, I settled into a small apartment in downtown Omaha. The hum of the city outside my window was a stark contrast to the stifling silence of my parents' house. My coworker Gloria had found the listing, a cozy one-bedroom with just enough space for my salvaged TV and sofa. She stopped by that first night, her warm laugh filling the bare living room as she helped me unpack boxes. "You need to get out of your head, Dorothy," she said, tossing me a flyer for a yoga class at a nearby studio. It's not just stretching, it's a reset. I wasn't sold, but her enthusiasm was hard to resist. The next evening, I showed up to the class, fumbling through poses, feeling lighter for the first time in weeks. Gloria's encouragement stuck with me, a small anchor as I rebuilt my life. Still, I couldn't shake the unease about my brother's wife. Her flashy lifestyle, those designer bags, that shiny SUV, kept gnawing at me. I decided to dig deeper. I called Michael, an old colleague in real estate I'd met years ago at a conference. He picked up on the second ring, his voice steady but curious. "Dorothy, it's been a while. What's up?" I got straight to the point, asking if he knew anything about Miriam, Justin's wife. I described her job as a real estate agent, her big talk about deals, and the money she seemed to have in spades. Michael went quiet for a moment. "Miriam Cole?" he asked. "She's been on a few radars. Word is her agency's under investigation for shady deals, flipping properties with fake appraisals, skimming client funds. Nothing's proven yet, but she's not clean." My heart sank. I thanked Michael and hung up, my mind racing. If Miriam was trouble, my family was in deeper than I thought. I dialed Dad's number, hoping he'd listen. "Dad, you need to hear this." I started explaining what Michael had told me about Miriam's firm. His response was a curt grunt. "Don't stick your nose in their business, Dorothy," he said. "They're doing fine without you stirring things up." I pressed harder, mentioning the investigation, but he cut me off. "Enough. Focus on your own life." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, frustration boiling. Dad's blind trust in Justin and his wife was maddening, but I wasn't surprised. He had always chosen Justin's side, no matter the cost. Mom was next. I called her, hoping for a crack in her usual silence. "Mom, please, just listen," I said, laying out the red flags about Miriam. She sighed, her voice soft but firm. "Dorothy, let it go. They're happy. Don't ruin it." I wanted to scream. How could they be so blind? But I knew arguing was pointless. Mom never challenged Dad or Justin. I hung up, feeling more alone than ever, but determined to find answers. I started reaching out to old contacts. A former client from my engineering firm had worked in real estate law, so I sent her an email asking if she'd heard of Miriam's agency. She replied quickly, confirming Michael's story. The firm was tied to several complaints about fraudulent mortgages. Another contact, a surveyor I'd collaborated with, mentioned overhearing gossip at a local title company about Miriam pushing questionable deals. Each piece of information tightened the knot in my stomach. I wasn't just suspicious anymore. I was certain she was hiding something big. I kept my findings to myself, building a mental file of everything I'd learned. I checked public records online, finding a few properties listed under Miriam's name, all sold at inflated prices to buyers who later filed disputes. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to keep me digging. I texted Michael again, asking him to let me know if he heard anything new. He promised to keep an ear out. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my new routine: work, yoga, dinners with Gloria. The city felt like a fresh start, but the weight of my family's dismissal lingered. I couldn't help wondering how far Miriam's schemes reached, and whether Justin was in on it, or just another pawn. 2 weeks later, I ran into Hazel, an old family friend, at a local cafe. She was sipping coffee at a corner table, her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Dorothy, it's been ages," she said, waving me over. We caught up briefly, but when I mentioned Justin's wife, Hazel's smile faded. "Miriam Cole?" she asked, her voice low. "I knew her years ago. She worked for a real estate firm in Lincoln, shady outfit, always cutting corners. They got sued for forging client signatures and inflating property values to pocket the difference. Miriam was in deep, though she dodged the fallout. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just gossip. It was a piece of the puzzle I'd been chasing. I drove straight to my parents' house, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Justin was in the driveway, unloading groceries, looking smug as ever. I didn't waste time. "We need to talk," I said, pulling out my phone to show him the email from Michael, my real estate colleague, detailing Miriam's agency's investigation. "She's not who you think, Justin. Her firm's been fleecing people for years. Fake appraisals, stolen funds. Hazel just told me she was part of a scam in Lincoln." Justin's face darkened. He snatched the phone, scanned the email, then shoved it back at me. "You're just jealous," he spat. "Miriam's successful, and you can't stand it. Stop making things up." I stared at him, stunned. "This isn't about me," I said. "This is about your wife putting our family at risk." He laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Go play detective somewhere else, Dorothy." Inside, Mom was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup. I tried again, hoping she'd hear me out. "Mom, Hazel knew Miriam before," I said, keeping my voice steady. "She was tied to a company that scammed people. You need to check what she's doing with the house." Mom Spoon paused, but she didn't look up. "Dorothy, don't start trouble," she said softly. "Justin's happy. That's what matters." I wanted to shake her, to make her see the danger, but her words felt like a wall. She'd always stayed out of conflict, leaving me to fight alone. Back at my apartment, I called Michael, my voice tight with frustration. Hazel confirmed it. I told him. Miriam was with a crooked firm in Lincoln. "Anything new on her?" Michael sighed. "I dug deeper after we talked," he said. "Her name's on a mortgage document for your parents' house, signed last month. It's a second lien, Dorothy, tied to some shell company. If she's pulling what I think, they could lose everything." My stomach dropped. The house I'd poured my savings into, the one I'd fought to keep standing, was now a pawn in Miriam's game. I asked Michael to send me the documents, my hands shaking as I hung up. I spent the next few hours combing through public records online. The mortgage Michael mentioned was real, a 6-figure loan against the house with Miriam's signature scrawled next to Dad's. I found another record, a transfer of funds from my parents' savings to an account linked to her agency. It wasn't just fraud. It was personal. She'd used my family's trust to line her pockets. Every call I'd made to Dad, every warning Mom ignored, felt like a betrayal all over again. They'd chosen Justin and Miriam over me, and now they were tangled in her mess. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The weight of it all, years of carrying the family only to be pushed out, hit me hard. But I wasn't done. Miriam thought she could play everyone, but I'd seen through her from the start. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything we'd built. I saved every document, every email, every scrap of evidence. This wasn't just about protecting the house anymore. It was about exposing her for who she was. I'd make sure she couldn't hide, no matter how fast she tried to run. One evening, as I was working late at my apartment, my phone buzzed with a call from Mom. Her voice was shaky, almost a whisper. "Dorothy, there are people here. They're asking for Miriam." I grabbed my keys and drove to my parents' house, my heart pounding. When I arrived, 2 investigators stood in the driveway, badges glinting under the porch light. Dad was at the door, his face pale, while Justin paced behind him, clutching his phone. "This is about some real estate deals," one investigator said, holding up a stack of papers. "We need to speak with Miriam Cole. She's linked to fraudulent transactions, forged documents, misappropriated funds." I stayed quiet, watching as Justin's eyes widened. "She's lying." "Mom, tell me she's lying," Justin shouted, turning to Mom, who stood frozen in the hallway. The investigators explained that Miriam had used Justin's name on several shady deals, including a loan tied to the house. Mom clutched her sweater, shaking her head, but said nothing. Dad stepped forward, his voice trembling. "She's not here right now," he said. The investigators handed him a card, warning they'd be back. As they left, I saw Miriam's car pull up across the street. She hadn't noticed me yet. I crossed the road, my phone already recording in my pocket. "Miriam!" I called, my voice steady despite the rage inside. She froze, her eyes darting to the house. "What's this about Dorothy?" she asked, her tone sharp. I didn't back down. "I know about the mortgage, the savings account, everything," I said. "You've been draining my family. Tell me the truth." Her face twisted, but she didn't run. "Fine," she snapped. "I took the money. The house was collateral for a deal. Your dad signed off on it. Justin was too clueless to notice." I pressed record harder, catching every word. "You used them," I said. She smirked, unapologetic. "They trusted me. That's on them." Before I could respond, she jumped into her car and sped off, tires screeching. I stood there, the weight of her confession sinking in. She was gone, leaving my family to clean up her mess. Back at the house, Justin was unraveling. How could she do this? He muttered, running his hands through his hair. He turned to me, his voice desperate. Dorothy, you knew something was off. Why didn't you stop her? I stared at him, incredulous. I tried, I said. You called me jealous. You all shut me out. Mom looked away, her silence louder than ever. Dad sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. The investigators' papers were still on the table, detailing loans and transfers I'd warned them about. My phone rang again later that night. It was Dad, his voice broken. Dorothy, we're in trouble, he said. The bank's calling in the loan. We might lose the house. Can you come back? We need you. I closed my eyes, the years of being dismissed flashing through my mind. The bills I'd paid, the repairs I'd made, the dinner where they had pushed me out. No, Dad, I said, my voice firm. I gave everything for that house, and you chose Justin and Miriam over me. You're on your own now. He pleaded, his words stumbling, but I hung up. For the first time, I felt free, like I'd finally let go of a weight I'd carried too long. The next morning, I listened to the recording again, Miriam's voice, cold and clear, admitting to the scam. I saved it, knowing it could be evidence if the investigators needed it. Justin and my parents were left to face the fallout. Debts piling up, the house at risk, their trust in Miriam shattered. I'd done my part, warned them, fought for them, but they'd made their choice. I wasn't going back to fix their mistakes. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house to see the aftermath. The front yard was quiet, the porch lights still on from the night before. Inside, papers were strewn across the dining table, bank notices, loan agreements, and a foreclosure warning. I sat down with Dad, who handed me a folder from the bank. The numbers were brutal. A second mortgage on the house for $250,000, signed by him and Miriam, with no payments made. Their savings account, once holding nearly $200,000 for retirement, was drained, transferred to an account linked to Miriam's firm. I traced the transactions, my engineering brain piecing together the wreckage. The house I'd kept afloat for years was now a financial sinkhole, teetering on the edge of repossession. Justin slumped on the couch, his eyes red. Dorothy, you've got to help us, he said, his voice cracking. The bank's coming for everything. We're broke. I looked at him, the brother who'd mocked me at that dinner, who'd called me jealous when I warned him about Miriam. Help you, I said, my tone cold. You told me I wasn't essential, Justin. You and Dad pushed me out, told me to take the guest room or leave. I left. Now you want my money to fix this. He flinched but pressed on. We're family, he said. I shook my head. You made your choice. I'm done bailing you out. Dad stood by the window, his shoulders hunched. I messed up, Dorothy, he said, his voice low. I trusted her. I thought she and Justin had it all figured out. I was wrong. His admission hit me, but it wasn't enough. 4 years, I'd poured my savings into their home, worked overtime to cover their bills, only to be sidelined for Justin's empty promises and Miriam's schemes. You didn't just trust her, Dad, I said. You chose her over me. You chose Justin's dreams over my reality. I can't fix that. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, but I held firm. I'd given too much already. Mom came in from the kitchen, her face streaked with tears. Dorothy, please, she said, her voice trembling. We're going to lose everything. The house, our savings, it's all gone. She reached for my hand, but I pulled back. Her silence during that dinner, her refusal to hear my warnings, stung as much as Dad's dismissal. You didn't listen, Mom, I said. I tried to tell you about Miriam, but you told me to let it go. Now you're asking me to save you. She sobbed, covering her face, but her tears couldn't undo the years of being overlooked. I felt a pang of guilt, but it wasn't enough to change my mind. I wasn't their safety net anymore. I walked through the house, seeing the traces of my contributions, the new windows I'd paid for, the fridge I'd replaced, the walls I'd painted. It was all at risk now, tied up in Miriam's fraud. The bank notices warned of foreclosure within weeks if the loan wasn't addressed. Justin had no job, no plan, just excuses. Dad's pension wouldn't cover the debt, and Mom's part-time work at a local shop was barely enough for groceries. They were staring down bankruptcy, and for the first time, I realized I couldn't fix it. Not because I didn't have the means, but because I didn't owe them that sacrifice. I left the house, the weight of their desperation lingering. Back at my apartment, I stared at the recording of Miriam's confession, the one piece of leverage I still had. I'd sent it to the investigators, hoping it would help their case, but it wouldn't bring back the money or the house. My family was fractured, not just by Miriam's betrayal, but by years of taking me for granted. I'd built a new life in Omaha, with my own space, my own choices. I wasn't going back to being the one who carried them all. 6 months later, I sat in my new apartment with Gloria, sunlight streaming through the window as we shared a bottle of wine. My desk was cluttered with blueprints from a new project at work, a bridge design that had earned me a promotion to lead engineer. The raise came with it, enough to furnish my place with a new coffee table and a bookshelf I'd always wanted. Gloria, now my closest friend, raised her glass. "To you, Dorothy," she said, her smile wide. "You're killing it." I laughed, feeling a lightness I hadn't known in years. My life was my own now, yoga classes twice a week, dinners with Gloria, and a career that was finally mine to shape. I was happy, not because everything was perfect, but because I'd chosen myself. I'd heard through a mutual friend that my family had lost the house. The bank foreclosed after they missed too many payments, and they'd moved to a cramped rental apartment in the suburbs of Omaha. Justin was working part-time at a hardware store, barely scraping by after Miriam's betrayal. His confidence was gone, replaced by late-night calls to friends, begging for loans. Dad and Mom were picking up odd jobs, Dad driving for a delivery service, Mom cleaning houses. The debts Miriam left behind loomed large, with no savings to soften the blow. They were surviving, but just barely, their lives upended by the choices they'd made. I hadn't spoken to them since that last visit. Justin sent a few texts asking for money or a place to stay, but I didn't reply. Dad left voicemails, his tone softer than before, but I couldn't bring myself to call back. Mom sent a letter once, a page of apologies and regrets, but it sat unopened on my counter. I'd spent years carrying their burdens, only to be pushed aside when I needed them most. Cutting them off wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I'd learned to value my self-respect over their expectations, to set boundaries that protected my peace. Looking back, I saw the lesson clearly. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who see you, who value you, who stand by you. Gloria had become that for me, a friend who showed up without asking for anything in return. My family had chosen Miriam's lies over my warnings, and I'd paid the price for their blindness. But in walking away, I'd found something stronger, my own worth. Setting boundaries wasn't about shutting people out. It was about guarding what mattered most, my heart, my time, my life. I want to thank you for following my story, for sticking with me through this mess of betrayal and redemption. It's not easy to draw lines with the people you love, but sometimes it's the only way to save yourself. Have you ever had to set boundaries with your family? What did you learn from it? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. Let's talk about what it means to stand up for ourselves, even when it hurts.